Glad you're here. Thank God for the rain, because a lot of you would not have been here if it hadn't been for the rain. How many have ever heard me preach some different sermons? I'll put it different. I'm going to give you a different one today. We're going to talk about the beginning of David's life and the end of David's life. But we're going to talk about why did David face Goliath. Now, I've read all kinds of things, and I can't find anybody that knows the truth of the matter. So I'm going to give you what the Word says. We're going to 1 Samuel 17. Just to give you a little bit of background. Now, if you listen real fast, this won't take real long. First Samuel 17, Israel is at war with the Philistines. Nothing unusual about that. They were fighting then, they're still fighting today. 3,000 or 3,500 years, Palestine, the Philistines, they call themselves Palestinians now, they've been fighting against Israel. They're at war. Jesse, David's father, sends David to take some supplies and to check on his brothers who are in the army. They're warriors, trained warriors, in Saul's army. So David arrives. Now I'm telling you a familiar story. David arrives. The armies are arrayed for battle. The Philistines are on the mountain on one side, the Israeli army on the mountain on the other side, and in the middle was a valley, which was the battlefield. The armies are ready to fight. Flags are flying, horses are snorting, trumpets are ready to blow. And David shows up. He's a spectator. He's just going to watch. He's not a warrior. Actually, he's just a teenager, an adolescent. Goliath appears in the valley. He does this every morning and every evening. He appears in the valley. Now, Goliath makes a little speech. He says, "Send a man down to fight me. If he kills me, we will be your servants. But if I kill him, you will be our servants, and you will serve us." That's in verse 8 through 10. Now, stop a minute. Goliath is not just, he's big. He's about 9 feet tall from the measurement it gives us. He's about 9 feet tall. He has a spear that's like a weaver's beam. It's huge. But he's not just big. He's good. He has been trained from his youth up to be a warrior. Here is a freak of nature. Huge. From the time he was in grade school, they began to train him to be a warrior. He has been trained from his youth up, it says. Now, he's good. All right, now, stop a minute. So let's make it personal. All of this is of no value. If I can't make this book real to you, then there's no point in me standing up here telling you a story. How many of you have ever faced a Goliath problem in your life? Now, I'm not talking about one of them little pygmy giants. I'm talking about one of them big boys. Something you didn't know how to handle. It overwhelmed you. When you are faced with a Goliath problem in your life, the temptation is to run, to give up, to quit. You face the giant, and the first thing that happens, in psychology it's called being paralyzed by fear. Have you ever been so terrified at something you were facing, you were almost paralyzed? When you read the story of David, you soon begin to realize that Goliath was the best thing that ever happened to David. Goliath was the best thing that ever happened to David. Now that problem, that crisis that you face, may be the best thing that ever happened to you. That may be the thing that is the beginning of something great in your life. Goliath is big, he's good, he's trained. And when he gave his speech, he'd been doing this for 40 days, every morning and every night. When he gave his speech, all of Israel ran. Look at verse 24. 1 Samuel 17:24. This will probably be on the screen. It says, and all the men of Israel, when they saw the man, they saw Goliath, they ran from him and were terrified. All of them. Now listen, David ran. I said, David ran. Everybody that was on that mountain ran. They were terrified. They didn't know what to do. And I know you've been taught all of your life that while everybody else was running, David stood there big, bold, bad, and brave and said, who is this uncircumcised Philistine? You may not have known what uncircumcised meant, but that's not what happened. David ran. Like everybody else, David ran. Why did David face Goliath? The whole army, the entire army of Israel was demoralized. Fear took over. And when David saw the giant and heard his speech, David ran like everybody else. I'm trying to reinforce the fact David was a runner. David ran from the giant. David saw a bigger problem than he could handle, and he ran like everybody else. Now look at verse 25. When they get back to camp, David hears some soldiers talking. They weren't talking to him. They were just talking among themselves. And they said, do you know what the reward is to the man who kills Goliath? The king is going to make him rich. He's going to marry the princess. And he will never have to pay any taxes. Verse 25. And David said, what? What did you say? He wanted to know what they said. He wanted to know what the reward was to the man that kills Goliath. That's when David said, what? What did you say? Repeat it. He'd heard what they said, but he wanted them to repeat it. So they repeated it. The man that kills Goliath, the king's going to make him rich. He's going to marry the princess. And he'll never have to pay any taxes. That's verse 26. That's when David said, what? What did you say? What's the reward? Who is this uncircumcised Philistine? That he would defy the armies. Why hasn't somebody gone down there and killed that boy? And did you get that picture? Verse 27. And they answered him after the manner. They told him the same thing. He said, repeat what you said. What's the reward? They said, the man that kills Goliath is going to be made rich. He's going to marry the princess. He will be a prince. And he'll never have to pay any taxes. David wanted it repeated again and again. He liked what he heard. Now I'm going to stop again for just a minute. I'm going to talk to you. This is your day. You must have a vision, a goal, a dream. You must have something that makes you want to get up of a morning. Something that just absolutely turns you on. Lights your lights, dims your tubes, flips your switch. If you don't have a vision, something to make you get up of a morning, you die. Where there is no vision, people perish. They die. You want to die? Lose your vision. Find something that makes you want to get up. Some project, something that makes you want to get up in the morning. It was the idea of marrying the princess, of being made rich, and never having to pay taxes. It was the reward that got David's attention. It wasn't the giant. It wasn't the giant that turned David on, it was the princess. He wanted to marry the princess, be made rich. Are you hearing me? Now look at verse 28. David's older brother, Eliab, he was the oldest of all of the brothers. He heard what David was saying. When David said, who is, they would repeat the reward, and David would say, well, who is this uncircumcised Philistine? Who does he think he is that he would defy? Why doesn't somebody go down there and kill him? Everybody wants to be rich. Everybody wants to marry the princess. Everybody wants to be a prince. Everybody wants to get the reward. Now, his brother heard him, and he got so angry at David. This is verse 28. He goes to him, David, he said, why are you here? What are you doing here? Who's tending your little flock of sheep? He belittled David, made him feel small. All you've ever done is tend to a little flock of sheep. You're not a warrior. You're not trained at war. You know nothing about war, know nothing about fighting, and here you are talking all big, bold, brave, and bad. You're not bad enough to face that giant. Now listen. Sometimes, church, people, your family, your friends, will try to shoot down and destroy your dream. You get saved, you want to live for God, you want to do something for God, you want to accomplish something, and people who know you, your friends, your family, some of them will say, well, who do you think you are? Do you think you're better than we are? What makes you think? David's brother said, I know how proud you are, how haughty you are. You really think you're something. Now understand, David had been anointed king, but all he had ever done was tend sheep. Now, stay with me. The people that know you will sometimes try to destroy you if you're not doing what they want you to do. Now, you've heard me say before, verse 29 and 30. David asked his brother, what have I done wrong? What have I done? Is there not a just cause? Is the reward not great enough? And delivering Israel, is that not great enough? What have I done that's wrong? And what did David do about it? It says he turned from him to another. He said, I'm not listening to you anymore. I'm going to go listen to somebody else. And he went and found some other people, and he asked them the same question he'd been asking, what's the reward for the man that kills Goliath? And they gave him the same answer. It's at verse 30. They answered him, gave him the same answer. King's going to make him rich. He'll marry the princess. And he'll never have to pay any taxes. And David was saying, why doesn't somebody go down and kill this guy? Let's bring it down to you. You've heard me talk before about this. You get saved and you've got some friends and they don't want you. All right, I'll put it this way. Just make it simple. They won't go to church with you, but they want to pull you out. They won't go to church with you on Sunday. They won't take you to the lake and drink beer on Sunday. You either need to get your friend saved or you need to get a new set of friends. That's why you need a church home. You're out there, you need a church family. You're out there fighting and facing the world and the devil and getting beat up all week. You come to the Lord's house on the Lord's day. You join with God's people. You get your faith strengthened. You get renewed. You get restored. You're ready to go out again on Monday and face the devil again. David found someone else. He went and found somebody else. And he talked to them, asked them the same thing. They told him the same answer. David put his mind on the prize, not the problem. Too often, we get absorbed with the problem. We look at Goliath and we start analyzing the giant. What does he look like? How tall is he? How much does he weigh? How far can he throw that spear? How fast can he run? Because I'm probably going to be in a running mood. Stop looking at the problem. Stop looking at the failures in your life. Stop looking at the mistakes you've made. Stop looking at the hurts, the sickness, the pain, the defeats, the disappointment, the people that have let you down. Stop looking at that problem. Stop looking at the giant and start looking at the princess. Start looking at the reward. The Apostle Paul put it this way. He said, I have not yet arrived, but this one thing I do. I press towards the mark of the prize. I'm keeping my eye on the prize of the high calling of God in Christ Jesus. Don't look at the problem, he said. Look at the prize. You can't get the prize without killing the giant. You can't pick the roses without finding a thorn. Anything worth having is worth fighting for. Don't panic. Don't panic when you see the giants. When you see the giants, when the problem comes up in your life, just look and realize there's a prize on the other side. Start looking for the prize. Verse 31. When these people David kept going around. He went around everywhere he went. He went through the whole army. He was asking the same question, getting the same answer. Everybody knew it. He was new there. New kid on the block. And they went and told King Saul what David was saying. And Saul sends for David. Now that's a miracle in itself. Saul obviously knew that David had been anointed by Samuel. Saul sends for David because he knows there's something special, and maybe he sent for David because he wanted to send him down and get him killed. I don't know what Saul's thinking was. Like I wasn't there in his head. I'd like to spend a little time with him. He wouldn't let me. He knew I was there. He wouldn't let me. Anyway, David's on his way to see the king. Be David for a minute now. You're David. What's going through your mind when you know the king has sent for you? He knows everything's against him. He's young. He's inexperienced. He has no training as a warrior. And David knew there was going to be long lines of trained warriors standing in line, to try to get an opportunity to go down and kill Goliath so they could get the reward. That's what he was expecting, because everybody wants the reward. Everybody wants to be rich, marry the princess, and never pay any taxes. That was a great reward. David shows up at Saul's tent, and there's nobody there. There are no camels in the parking lot. No one's filling out applications. Nobody's waiting in line. I'll tell you this about God. Anytime you make a decision that you're going to do something for God, there's always room for you. Everybody wants to do something for God, but there's not many people standing in line. Everybody wants the reward, but not many are willing to face the giant. David was willing. Listen, David made a lot of mistakes in his life. He did a lot of bad things. But one thing David did, he was willing to try. He would put himself on the line. God is not looking for people who can do it. He's looking for people who will try so he can do it. He wants, it would be a horrible thing. Live your whole life and stand before God and have him say, you never tried. You never gave me a chance to work with you or work through you. You never witnessed anybody. Never invited anybody to church. Never laid hands on anybody that was sick. You never tried. I'm letting that soak. Have you tried? Verse 41. Philistine drew, when David goes out. Saul agrees, I'm skipping all that. Saul tries to get David to wear his armor. It wouldn't fit. Don't wear somebody else's armor. Hey, if God called you to preach, don't try to be like me. You can be better than me. David said, no, I don't know anything about that. All I know is tending sheep. When a lion came out, I killed it. When a bear came out, I killed it. All I've got is my slingshot. And the Philistine came down, David comes down. Goliath comes down in the valley, verse 41. And he had his sword, his shield, his spear. He was covered in armor. And when Goliath looked and saw David, verse 42, he despised him, he disdained him, he hated him. For he was but a youth. Actually, the Greek said he was an adolescent. He was a teenager. He was ruddy. So, now, the word ruddy means reddish. Some people believe David was redheaded. I don't know. But he had a fair complexion. And the giant Goliath looked at David and he said, am I a dog? All David had was his shepherd's staff and his slingshot. And he said to David, am I a dog? You come at me with a stick? And the Philistine, the giant, began to curse David in the name of his gods. Now stay with me for a minute. I'm almost through with this section. Are you enjoying the story? Yeah. David ran. Now then, he's facing the giant. Why did he face the giant? He wanted the prize. He wanted to marry the princess. Never pay any taxes and be rich. Now, David tried. All right, now you were David going to see King Saul, expecting a long line. Now then, I want you to be Goliath. Be Goliath for a minute. What did he think when he saw David? He probably thought, this is turning into a real public relations nightmare. They knew they didn't have anybody that could beat me. So what did they do? They sent a kid out. So they can say, well, of course Goliath won. Look who he was fighting. He was just fighting a kid, teenager. This is turning into be a real nightmare. And, my philosophy always was, I grew up a fighter. I can't help it. But my philosophy was always fight somebody bigger than you are, because that way you can't lose. Because if he's beating you up, everybody's going to say, look at that big guy beating up on that little one. And if you've beaten him, they're going to say, look at that little bitty guy beating up on that. But you can't lose. David was in a win-win situation. Now, Goliath must have been thinking, I'm going to be the laughing stock. Instead of being the champion, people are going to laugh at me. I was born and I was trained for this moment, and everybody's going to laugh at me. But verse 44, he said, if that's what it is, that's what it is. Come on. Come on. That's what he said, verse 44. He said, I will feed you to the buzzards today. Now, be David. Now you've been David on the way to see the king. You've been the giant. Now be David again. You're out here facing this giant. It's one thing to be big, bad, bold, and brave when you're in the safety of the camp surrounded by warriors. It's something else when you're down in the valley and there's the giant in front of you and there's nobody there but you. It's one thing to be big, bold, and brave when you're at church and thinking about and talking about and listening to the preacher and get all motivated and inspired to do something. And you all big, brave, bad, and bold, and then you get out there and face the giant the next day. What are you going to do? Verse 45, listen to what David said. Verse 45 through 47, I'm going through it quick. David looked at that giant and he said, you come at me with a spear and a sword and a shield? I'm coming at you with in the name of the Lord. You've defied the armies of Israel. But he said, this day, the Lord will deliver you into my hand. And I will smite you. And the buzzards are going to they're not going to eat a little Jew today. They're going to eat a big giant today. They're going to eat a big Philistine. They're going to have a bigger feast than what they were thinking. Because I'm going to feed your carcass to the fowls of the air. And all of the spectators are going to know that there is a God in Israel. And all of the assembly is going to know that the Lord does not save by sword or by spear. The battle is the Lord's, and He will give you to me. David throws the rock, and Goliath falls. Now be the spectators. You're a spectator on one side of the mountain or the other. You're watching this. What's going through your mind? This is a trick. He didn't just fall. This is a trick. He's faking it. He's playing dead. Now be David again. You don't know whether he's faking it or not either. And you've got to walk up there and check and make sure. What are you going to do? Anybody ever kill a bear? I went grizzly hunting in Alaska. I killed a big grizzly. When I walked up with a hammer cocked. And I poked him in the eye with my finger on the trigger. I wanted that puppy dead. I imagine David went up and poked him in the eye. I don't know. We're just being David. But come on, think. What if he's faking it? What if he's just playing dead? David's walking up and everybody's holding their breath. What if David gets up there and Goliath grabs him and starts jerking his arms off and twists his head off? And you're David. You got to go up there and check this out. So David, are you okay? I'm loving this look I'm getting on some of you. Fascinating. Well, David, he must have had a lot of faith, because he told Goliath, I'm going to cut your head off. With what? He didn't even have a pocket knife. So he goes up. I suppose he punches him in the eye with his staff. Goliath doesn't move, so he takes Goliath's sword and cuts his head off. He told him, I'm going to cut your head off. He must have been planning on using the sword he had. Now, I could fall into the trap that I try to stay away from. But David cut his head off, grabbed him by the hair, and lifted his head up for everybody to see. Now listen. Follow this head. David carried this giant's head with him everywhere he went. He took and showed King Saul Goliath's head. When he got on the airplane to go home, he set that big head down in the seat beside him. Everywhere he went, read it. Read the story. It's a fascinating story. He carried his head around with him. When the Philistines saw David standing there with Goliath's head, they panicked and they ran. They're the ones that's running now. And all Israel saw them running, so they started running after them. They gave a big shout, it says. I tell you what, let's wake everybody up. Everybody give a big victory shout like you're Israel and you're chasing the giant. If you got a giant, give him a victory shout. You ready? 1, 2, 3. Visitors, it'll be all right. If you haven't been here very long, hang around. One man won the day and saved a nation. You never know what you can be or what you can do until you try, but nothing happens until you try. Okay, that's how David's life began. That Goliath was the best thing that ever happened to David. Now I want you to look at how David's life ended. I'm going to skip the whole story. Jeremy made a comment when he was talking about the little things that David took care of. He had been anointed king, but it was years down the road before he actually became king. He just tended to business on the way. I'm going to skip that whole story, and I'm going to take you to David's deathbed. Go to 1 Kings chapter 2. David is dying, and he's speaking to his son Solomon. He's giving him a sum total of what he should be, of what Solomon should be. And this is what David had done and what he had learned in his life. And he says, now the days, he says to his son Solomon, he said, I'm dying. Time for me to die. Verse 1. And he charged Solomon, saying, I'm going the way of the earth. It's time for me to go. Be strong and show yourself a man. Be strong and show yourself a man. And then he defines manhood. Verse 3. He said, if you want to be strong and show yourself a man, keep the charge of the Lord thy God. Walk in his ways. Keep his statutes, his commandments, his judgments, his testimony, as is written in the law of Moses. And then, if you do that, son, you will prosper. You will have wisdom. You will do wisely, is what the Hebrew says. You will do wisely. In all that you do, and wherever you go, you will prosper. Whatever you do will prosper. Wherever you go, you're going to prosper. If you do these things, if you'll be strong, show yourself a man. And what that means is keep the charge of the Lord. Walk in his ways, keep his statutes, his commandments, his judgments, and his testimony. If you do that, son, you will be wise. How many know if you make wise decisions, you'll prosper? How many made enough bad, unwise decisions? Made my share of those. Now listen, I'm going to close pretty quick. The world today, our nation today, churches and homes today are crying for men who will be strong and show themselves a man. Politics aside, like him or hate him, I don't care. Thank God for Trump. I'm going to be nice. I am so disgusted with the politicians, and Republicans included. They are so afraid. Politicians today are so afraid. I'm getting way off track. They're so afraid of losing their power that they can't do what's right. They're afraid to back a decision or make a decision because they're afraid they won't get reelected. You know, sometimes doing what's right is better than being elected. We need some men. The world, the churches, nation, our homes need some men who will put character above wealth, who will put God above self. Men who are not afraid of adversity. Men who are not ashamed to stand for the truth even if it's painful. David said to Solomon, be strong, show yourself a man. In Ephesians 6:10 it says, be strong in the Lord and the power of his might. 1 Corinthians 16:13, stand fast in the faith, act like a man, and be strong. 6 times in Joshua chapter 1, God tells Joshua to be strong and of good courage. When I read this book, I become more convinced all the time that God is not looking for a bunch of wimps. He's looking for some men who are not afraid to take a stand, men whose word is their bond. There was a time when you could shake a man's hand and knew that his word was his bond. I don't know if I told you this. I'm going to tell you. Anyway, it's too early to let you go. You get spoiled if I let you go too quick. When I was about 10 years old, my dad died when I was 12, just before I turned 12. He died in April. I turned 12 in May. I remember my dad went down. He was wanting to buy a car. And he was looking at a 1941 Chevrolet. My dad's name was Fred McKinley Evans. He went down and he was talking to a guy. He found the car that he wanted. And he said, talked to the guy, gave him his price. My dad said, I'll take the car. He said, I'll have to go to the bank. And they shook hands. And Dad said, I'll have to go to the bank and make arrangements for the payments. And I'll never forget this. It stuck with me to this day. He looked at my dad and he said, Fred, You just shook my hand. You just come and pay me anytime you want to. You don't need to go to the bank. Your word is good with me. Ten-year-old never forgot it. I want to be a man of my word. Now that's a little more far-reaching than some of you are looking at. I think we need men whose word is their bond. Men who will keep their word to God, to the church, to the pastor, to their families, and to themselves. Keep your word. We need men in our homes. Too many men have abandoned spiritual leadership in their homes. A third of all babies born in the United States today are born to single mothers. Where are the fathers? And young men, listen. If you don't want to make her your wife, don't make her a mama. Be a man. We need men in our homes, men who will bring their children up in the nurture and admonition of the Lord, men who will teach their children the Word of God and the great truths of the Christian faith, men who will spend time with their kids and be a mentor, a role model of what it means to be a godly man. Men, listen to me. It is impossible for a godly mother to overcome the influence of an ungodly father. Did you hear what I said? It is impossible for the godly mother to overcome the influence of an ungodly father. Little girls, their first love is their father. Little 3 or 4-year-old girl puts on her first dress. She wants to hear what her father has to say. She puts her first lipstick on. She wants to see what Daddy's got to say. And men, the young boys always want to be like Dad. They're going to follow in your footsteps. Be a man. Keep your word. We need men in our churches. I praise God for the men of our church. People who visit our church are always impressed, not with just the number, but the quality of men in our church. Most churches made up 80% of women and kids. I tell you what, men, would you mind standing? I don't mean to embarrass you. I just want you to stand. I want people to see the men in this church. Wow. 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 All right. Now, I know some of you old and got knee problems. No, remain standing. I want you to stand the rest of the sermon. Just stand. If you're a man or if you wish you were one, stand. I am always a little disappointed and let down when men say, Pastor, I don't have time to be a deacon. I don't have time to teach a class. I don't have time to be involved in the activities of the church. Well, I'll tell you what, men, what you do have time for. One day you'll take time to die. We need men who will be faithful, not just to God, but to themselves and to their family, who will keep their word. Men who are willing to give of themselves to serve the King of Kings. The fact is, we all have very short time on this planet. We have a very small amount of time to do anything of value in eternity. Anything of eternal value. I'll do what you want me to do, dear Lord. I yearn for the kingdom to thrive. I'll give you my nickels and dimes, dear Lord, but please don't ask me to tithe. I'll go where you want me to go, dear Lord. I'll say what you want me to say. I'm busy just now with myself, dear Lord. I'll help you some other day. Be strong and show yourself a man. We need some men in this country. We need some men in this nation. We need some men in our homes. We need men in our churches. Men who are strong, men of faith, men who will stand for truth and keep their word that they made to God, they made to their wife, they made to their children, and they made to their church. Thank God for these men. Happy Father's Day.